Welcome, guys. We are back for another episode of The Lock-In. We've got a very special guest this week. We are joined by the one and only Isaac Haxton. Ike, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great to have you, Ike. I'm also joined, of course, by Dara O'Kearney. Dara, welcome.
Thank you. My sense of time is obviously completely warped because it feels about 2 days since we were doing the last lock-in with Rob Campbell. Here we are again.
Here we are again. I think we might be a little bit early. I think you're right. We might be a day or two ahead of schedule on this one. But I can't help but notice there something new in your background. Do you mind me pointing that out? Is there something?
Yeah, this showed up yesterday. My new couch, which is a massive improvement on my old couch, which, as my wife explained to me, we've had for about 14 years and was really in a terrible state. The new couch is now sitting out on our lawn, so we basically look like knackers. And the new couch, I basically have to fight the dog. The dog just absolutely loves the couch. The dog has spent about 23 of the last 24 hours on that couch. And she's a dog who moves around the house a lot, usually. But she's decided this couch is where she lives now.
I'm now just imagining it like the episode of The Wire where, the couches are right out front of the house. It's like sort of sending a marker to people in your neighborhood. You might be a drug dealer. I don't know.
Well, we wouldn't be the only ones.
Okay, well, look, let's get on with this. There's a lot of poker stuff to chat about this week. The first topic I selected for us was Dan Colman, who issued, I suppose you would call it a PSA to the poker public a few days ago when he said that he was pretty confident, pretty sure that Sean Perry had scammed him. Now, this story, I don't know if everyone knows about it. I'll give a few cliffs. Coleman claimed that the scamming from Perry emanated from high-stakes daily fantasy sports betting between Perry and Sam Soverel, in which case sort of Soverel wasn't really betting enough with Perry, and he was looking for more action, and in swooped, I guess, to take the action, Dan Colman. Now, after that happened, Coleman sort of figured out something might be awry when he realized that 3 of the accounts that they were using, so they would sort of take turns at getting the first account, and then the other guy get the next 2, and then the other guy get the next 2, and they did that on alternate days. The bottom 3 accounts were not established accounts. They were sort of random accounts that nobody really knew much about, and he was pretty sure that they were actually owned by Perry, which was the source of all the problems. The reason he figured that out was he sent it to somebody he knows who knows daily fantasy sports, who said that on the days where it was Dan's account, they would make very poor choices, and on the days where there was 2 of them in Coleman's account, not Coleman's account, on Sam's account, they would make, Sean's account, they would make very good decisions, which I guess is sort of how this is, taken place. So I guess the first question I want to ask is, a lot of people were sympathetic with Dan, and some people were sort of saying he was a bit wide-eyed and naive, and I wanted to know what you thought, like.
I mean, obviously, getting cheated sucks. I don't know enough about the situation to have any opinion about how likely that is. I guess it sounds bad. I guess people who understand the situation better than I do think that that's probably what happened. And yeah, I mean, of course, I feel bad for Dan.
Yeah,
but I mean, I guess at the same time, people who think that this was not an entirely surprising outcome are also not wrong. It seems kind of shitty to kick somebody when they're down by pointing that out. I think Dan would be the first to tell you that he had no reason to be 100% certain he would be treated fairly in this exchange.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like a hustle. Coleman also sort of, maybe he figured it out along the way, or maybe he figured it out already, but he sort of thinks that possibly Soverel and Perry tag teamed him. I wrote an article on this midweek where I described it as he might have got White Men Can't Jumped, alluding to the idea that, maybe, in that movie, Woody Harrelson was there as the mark and Wesley Snipes was pretending to be his teammate, or was his teammate, against 2 other guys, but in reality, he played badly so that he could share the spoils with the other 2 lads.
Right.
And I kind of thought maybe that's sort of what happened here. And of course, you quite famously, quite a while back, Ike, passed judgment on Soverel when
this
he did
might
that
come
angle. Yeah. There had to be some reason why we had you on this week. when you suggested that maybe, just maybe, Sovereign, is capable of such shenanigans, evidenced by the 50k high roller angle he shot.
Sure. Yeah. I haven't really changed my mind about that event or what I said then. It seems like he is willing to press questionable edges, ethically speaking. And I think that was... It's difficult for me to watch that clip and conclude anything other than that he did that on purpose. And I don't know firsthand what happened here. I have no idea, but it wouldn't especially surprise me, I guess.
Yeah, I guess just angle shooting or hustling of this nature. Someone in the comments sort of said, "Oh well, Doyle and Chip would have been doing all this kind of carry on, no problem. That was all part of the hustle." And Dara, I wanted to know, looking back over poker, I guess, and this isn't specifically in poker, although obviously it involves some poker players. There is a sort of a sense that maybe we've come out of the era of the hustler and into a sort of more honest, straightforward era. Occasional scamming alerts to one side. What would you sort of observe, I suppose, across the history of our game and maybe the way people are expected to conduct themselves?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, poker's origins were specifically a game designed to cheat people, and it has gradually gotten more and more respectable. And now we're definitely in an era where players are expected to behave ethically, and they won't, unethical behavior won't be tolerated by the community. There's still a little bit of residue, in the sense that when I compare it to other worlds that I've been involved in, poker players seem a little bit more forgiving of this type of stuff. But at the same time, I think, yeah, we are in an era now where they're more ethical. This is a story I wasn't really following. So when you sent the list of topics we were going to discuss, I did my due diligence and I read your excellent summary of it. Just want to say it's remarkable how I seem to look away for a few weeks and you've suddenly become the hottest writer in poker in terms of covering all the stories. But this one really didn't engage me very much, I have to say. It's two poker players, yes. It's two poker players, but it's essentially a sports betting scam. The one thing that jumped out at me, I did like Harold Albus's tweet where he said that he portrayed Sovereign as a not very good sports bettor, let's say, and said that people who lose in gambling and are willing to lie usually cross the line into scamming, which I thought was a very, very shrewd observation. The other observation I would say is, while it's very tempting to kick a guy when he's down and say to Coleman, yes, you were very naive, I don't think that's a helpful response, because when somebody has been scammed, what they're essentially doing is they're warning the rest of the community that, certain other people might need to be avoided. Now, there's usually, almost always on these occasions, somebody will come forward and say, well, you should have seen it coming because of this, this, and this. I've outed a few scammers in my time, and I've got exactly that reaction, and that discourages people, I think, from going public. So I don't think that's particularly useful.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's not helpful to laugh at people and kick them when they're down when they do this, because you think he doesn't already feel like a bit of a fool. Of course, I mean, even if you asked him before it happened, what do you think is the likelihood you're going to get scammed here? I bet he would have given you a number greater than 1%. He wanted to gamble, and this was out for some action, and I don't think he thought he was doing something really clever here.
Yeah, I think there is a human impulse to sort of victim blame, and this is unfortunately one manifestation of it. And as I said, when I wrote my blog on the people who scam me, I knew I'd behaved stupidly. I didn't need people to point out there were signs there you should have noticed. The reason why I wrote the blog was to warn other people. These are the signs to look for. But yeah, I mean, it's essential. I mean, Dan's tweet actually started with the words public service announcement, and that's exactly what it is.
Yep.
Yeah, well put. And I really like how you described that, except the bit where you sort of gave with one hand, complimenting me on my writing, and then just took it away immediately by saying you didn't like that piece. Thanks, Dara. Anyway, we move on. Hellmuth beat Negreanu again. It's just par for the course now. Hellmuth just wins all his heads ups. That's just what happens now. He does this, and in doing so, continues Daniel's losing streak. I suppose I want to just maybe shine a light on that in a moment, but on this you tweeted, and this I gotta say I really enjoyed it. You said, "I'm not keeping watch on any of this, but I'm glad Hellmuth keeps beating people heads up. It's hilarious." You followed that up with, "I've watched 0 minutes of any of it. I have no opinion on the relative skill levels of anyone involved. Phil crushing people is just extremely funny."
It is. It's just great. I mean, my level of familiarity with any of this is that I enjoyed the Apex Predator rant, and it's just great to see anybody who's taking themselves seriously go and play against the guy who did the Apex Predator rant and lose. It's just great.
Well, I must admit, I didn't watch it this time, and I didn't watch it the first time either, although I did watch sort of highlights of the first time round. But I had to write an article, as Tara pointed out, I have to write all the time now. So I wrote an article without seeing it. I read someone else's summary of the match. I decided I didn't really care about talking about the match at all. But what fascinated me was now this record, which is that over the last 8 years and 13 heads-up encounters in a row that Negreanu has had when his own money was on the line, he has lost all 13, and that is an outlier that is quite extraordinary. We're not quite at Monte Carlo levels of 26 blacks in a row, but we're pretty crazily in outlier territory. Admittedly,
that's getting up there. I mean, what's 2 to the 13th? That's a pretty big number, right?
Yeah.
Well, look, streaks obviously happen, but I was just interested, sort of from a. I guess, and I'm always have to be very careful when I talk about Daniel, but I just sort of felt like he was really happy to sort of drag Hellmuth's record out there, kind of going on about how he had no real results in high stakes stuff, although he does have a result in $1 million buy-in and a 300k buy-in, but at the same time, not wins, in fairness, they were sort of almost podium finishes. But given that he was sort of dragging Hellmuth's record out there, I wondered if it was sort of maybe him hiding the fact or trying to distract from the fact that actually his own record is so fucking terrible.
I'm not sure how aware of that he was until he obviously read your excellent piece. I just want to say again, pay you another compliment. Here
it comes.
It's not surprising to me that you've risen to the ranks so quickly as a writer, because you are obviously a very good writer. You're essentially like a good quality broadsheet writer for The Guardian or somebody. But in terms of what you cover, you're absolute gutter.
This is the Metro.
This is your tabloid.
This is the National Enquirer.
Yeah, National Enquirer. It is this weird mix. But coming back to Daniel, I certainly wasn't aware he had that bad a record. It's certainly possible from variance. I mean, at one point in my career, I was specializing in super turbo heads up sit and goes. And I used to keep religious records to try and work out what my edge was. And at the start, the edge was very big because they were new on the platform I was playing. So I was winning about 65% of them. But by the end, it had come down to 54%. But
65% of heads up.
Yeah, I mean, people were just terrible at the start.
That's incredible.
but the point was when it was at 54, so my edge was down to what it actually was. And I would keep records. I did have like 11 in a row losing spells reasonably frequently. So, and yet almost always over the sample of 100, I would come back to roughly 52 to 56 in that region. So it's possible, but it's also hilarious, as you pointed out. And as I pointed out, particularly hilarious that he's losing to Hellmuth, who he clearly has very little respect for in terms of his heads-up game. And, Daniel's been off in the lab for however long preparing to take on maybe the real Apex Predator Poke. And to be fair, doing a lot better towards the end than a lot of people thought he would. He obviously felt that Hellmuth was going to be very, very easy meat after that. But it does kind of make me believe that maybe there are poker gods and they were looking down at his pronouncements on Hellmuth and going, yeah, it's going to be really funny now when we make Hellmuth win.
I couldn't resist pulling out the calculator. 13 in a row is only about 1 in 8,200. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
My intuition was that it was an order of magnitude or two more than that.
It's nice to live in that, 1 in 8,200 worlds where in the simulation. That's kind of a good place to have fallen into. I also, there was, I think it was Melissa Burr. She's always great on Twitter. She tweeted sort of like where we were and where
how it started, how it's going.
That's the one. And the first one was him just saying, "Oh, Hellmuth's rubbish, can't win, can't beat the modern players, can't do anything any good." And then the next one was like, "I'm only human. Why are people so mean to me?" He did have a little 11 tweet thread moan. I think maybe having actually read my piece, maybe there's no way he would have read anything.
I saw that tweet, and it seemed like it was pretty directly a response to your article, even though he didn't refer to it.
It would have been poetic if it had been a 13-point tweet rather than an 11-point tweet.
Okay, enough humor. I already know there's going to be Dick Napkin hate. I'm going to be dealing with people in my Twitter DMs for the week. So I'm going to move on. Vaccinations. This is actually a topic I'm really interested in because the world is starting to change. I know that unfortunately in America, despite an amazing rollout of the vaccine there is a lot of vaccine hesitancy, which is probably going to upset the apple cart in terms of getting America to herd immunity as quickly as they would like. But we are watching poker, like I suppose the Negreanu Hellmuth thing. Okay, that's two guys; they can sort that out. But we are seeing huge tournaments being played in America, and we are going to see the rollout of more tournaments as the year goes on here in Europe too. Most likely, there's certainly some scheduled. There's one scheduled for next month in Tallinn, which I think might be still going ahead, and there's lots of stuff planned here in Malta for the autumn. So I think we're kind of getting back to that place. Ike, you liked a Victor Boonen tweet midweek that said, "Choosing not to get the vaccine shows you are an independent thinker that likes to do your own research, except you're absolutely garbage at it," which I really liked. It was a great tweet. It was good that you'd spotted it. And I suppose I just thought, like, one thing that I suppose unites the three of us here is that quite early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of people either not really accepting the reality, thinking the reality was far less than it would be. And then there was people maybe more curmudgeonly or realistic people like us who were just like, "Oh no, that's it now. 2 years probably before we get back to normal. It's going to be a long time." And of course, when America was starting to come back into live poker, in the last few months, I guess we were seeing things in the win and whatnot. You were very quick to sort of say, "Whoa, like slow down here, guys."
I mean, live poker in Vegas in December was a truly outrageous thing to be doing. I think at that point, if I'm remembering the number right, 1 in 1,500 people in Nevada were hospitalized with COVID at that moment. Like,
yeah, it was ground zero.
It was just, can't imagine a more reckless thing to be doing than running poker tournaments in that environment. At this point, it's a lot better. If everybody who's playing is vaccinated, I think that's fine. If most people who are playing are vaccinated and a few are not, and they're choosing to do that, I don't know. I think the people who are choosing not to get vaccinated are accepting certain specific circumstances where your health conditions indicate that you shouldn't. That's an unreasonable thing to be doing. But I don't know. I think it's okay that people are starting to play poker again now.
Okay, so I need some advice from both of you. There's a poker tournament here in Malta in about a month's time. In about a month's time, I will have had my first shot, not my second. So I think I get 70% immunity rather than the 90-something%. However, at the door of the casino, if you can't prove that you've had both shots, you have to get a test. And and they're instant tests, they've got the strip instant tests. And if you pass that, you can go in the door. Now, is that pretty good? Should I go and play? What is both your takes on that? Dara, you go first, I guess.
I personally still wouldn't go play, to be honest. It's just, I mean, it seems like a negative free roll. I presume the test is reasonably reliable, but people can be asymptomatic for a while, etc. So Yeah, I mean, it's one tournament. There's going to be lots of more tournaments down the line. It's remarkable how quickly the world is sort of seems to think it's over now because a few people have gotten vaccinated. I've heard of plexiglass coming out of, I think it was the Win in Vegas already.
Yeah.
And that seems bizarre. And it's also interesting to note that some of the places in the States which have seen live poker come back first were actually sort of COVID central. Florida has just had a huge series, and that was certainly one of the worst places for COVID. So yeah, it's almost like people just want it to be over now. So they're saying, okay, well, a few of us have got vaccinated, so let's get going again.
Okay, I normally take Dara's word as gospel, but I'm going to ask for a second opinion. Ike, what should I do?
I don't know. It seems not that bad. I guess it depends how much you care about playing this tournament. I would be less eager to do this than I ordinarily would. I think it's somewhat riskier than playing a poker tournament under normal circumstances, but it also sounds safer than any opportunity to go out in the world and do things that has presented itself for about a year. So I don't know. It doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world if you want to do it. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, now I'm not sure, but I also felt like Dara was maybe just trying to save me from myself. Maybe he thought I was going to lose money if I went and played this game as well. So they're going to have to factor in that possibility.
Yeah, I mean, you make so much more money from writing these days.
Okay, I'm glad that there's going to be a consistent theme through this piece. Question: are you in favor of vaccine passports? I guess I'd go first this time.
I am not entirely clear on what people mean when they say vaccine passports. I think there are a lot of different ways to interpret that phrase, and I don't know. I tend to be very much opposed to government-imposed requirements. At the same time, I think that people and businesses agreeing to designate places and things that require being vaccinated and voluntarily requiring that people demonstrate they've been vaccinated to, say, attend a concert or sporting event. I think that's okay. I think it's okay for people to want to be able to prove that they have been vaccinated if another person or a business wants that information and they want to furnish it. It's a thorny question. I am actually a little bit sympathetic to the viewpoint that it's a scary thing to start having the government keeping track of your health information and dictating how you can behave in response to that. So, yeah, it depends on a lot of specifics, I think. And it's not clear to me that the people who are talking about vaccine passports are thinking very clearly and precisely about what they actually mean by that phrase.
Yeah, it's clear there is some tension there. And I think you've actually encapsulated it really well, which is that most of us are maybe suspicious to at least some degree these days about our information being given away. We obviously have GDPR over here. Just having a bit more control over our personal data is important. At the same time, I think all three of us would agree that pandemics are, particularly maybe 1 in 100-year pandemics, are sort of exceptional circumstances. But as usual in exceptional circumstances, there is this tendency, I suppose you saw it with the Patriot Act in America or whatever, is that when there are exceptional circumstances, people overreach, and that therein lies maybe some of the tension. Dara?
Yeah, I think you're right on that. People do overreach and overreact. I hate to use the slippery slope argument as well, but if we establish that the government is allowed to keep track of everybody who has been vaccinated, then you can make an argument for other health conditions being tracked as well, and then you could eventually reach a stage where a lot of people who, due to ill health, are actually having their quality of life severely impacted by virtue of excluding them from certain activities just because they have certain conditions. It's something that I think the EU has always been very, very mindful of, and actually has been very good on not having too much centralized information on this stuff, not allowing too much discrimination. But as you said, people do react differently in pandemics, and to be honest, it's not something I feel really massively strongly about on either side. I mean, I can see the arguments on both sides, and they have a certain validity. But I would be more worried that it could start a new trend of where it becomes acceptable to place restrictions on people because of their health.
And to the slippery slope point as well, I think a lot of the people who are most worked up about resisting vaccine passports seem not to appreciate how much of this sort of thing already exists, at least as far as international travel and people living in countries where they are not citizens are concerned. If you want to come to the US from any of a number of other countries and apply for a visa and stuff like that, you have to demonstrate your vaccination history. That is not actually a totally new phenomenon. It is new for the people who are most worked up about it to encounter it in their daily lives. And I think that the degree to which some people seem to be upset about it reflects a bit of a perspective of privilege to not have ever had to consider this sort of thing before.
That's a great point. I suppose maybe just to finish this one off, the WSOP is a private company that, if it's going to be in the Rio, privately owned as well. Do you think these companies would benefit from making a very clear statement early on, say, to go, well, you do need to be vaccinated to play the World Series, or do you think they won't do that? So I suppose it's a kind of, do you think they will, and do you think they should question? Dara?
I think they'll make a commercial calculation, which one is most likely to benefit the most in terms of the numbers. On the one hand, if they come out and say everybody needs to be vaccinated, that will reassure people like us, for example, who might only travel if we felt it was reasonably safe. But on the other hand, you might be excluding a lot of people who have decided for whatever reason, however ridiculous, that they're not going to get vaccinated. So I think they'll make. I think they certainly should. I feel that it's just public responsibility at this stage, or a matter of community responsibility, to sort of try to make sure that your events don't become super spreader events, which this certainly has the potential. Having people coming from all over the world, with possibly different mutations of the coronavirus, it just seems we have used the term petri dish before. For poker tournaments, and certainly overused it. But if there ever was a case where you want to try to avoid turning your event into a big petri dish, I think this is it. The other thing is, like, we are in the end days of the pandemic, so I think let's just chill for a while. Let's just do the right stuff, come out of this properly, rather than have it lingering for a while.
Well, to push back slightly, and maybe you can weigh in here, like, I suppose you're absolutely right in that, from where we stand, this does feel like the beginning of the end, maybe, or, certainly somewhere around the third act. But so many places in the world, it's not. And of course, those people may very well want to come and play the World Series. And as you said, Dara, lots of mutations possibly about too.
Yeah, I mean, the two hotspots right now, as far as I'm aware, are India and Brazil, which are also two of the areas of the world where poker is developing the fastest. So poker is a genuinely global sport. And I said we're in the end days of the pandemic, and that is a slightly privileged position because I'm talking from a sort of a European/American perspective. Right. When you actually look at the numbers in the rest of the world, or even the numbers in the world as a whole, we're certainly not. We're kind of just past the peak. But having said that,
we might be about to reach a new peak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
having said that,
actually, if you adjust for underreporting of the statistics in India, that probably on a global scale, the pandemic is presently as bad as it's ever been.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, but we do have the vaccines now, so at least there is there is sort of a clear plan of action we can put into place to get this under control, which we didn't have a year ago. But yeah, I mean, that's basically all I have to say on that.
So, Ike, will they or and should they? You have a go.
I think they should, and I think they won't. I think it's pretty clear on both of those points. Caesars and the World Series, I think, are relatively conservative institutions. From an American perspective, that means that you are tolerant, if not supportive, of people who believe totally unsupported things about the vaccine and think that those people need to be accommodated. To be kind of on the right in America is to be at least comfortable not pushing back against people who think that there are serious pros and cons to the vaccine, that it's a reasonable position to not get it for your own safety. And I think that probably Caesars and the World Series are positioned politically in such a way that they are not going to want to take a stance that alienates those people. That's my read on the situation. I'm not certain I'll be proven right about that, but I think that from a perspective of responsible public behavior, it's very clear that they should require vaccination for people to participate in the World Series, and I would be shocked if it actually comes to pass. There aren't any other casinos in Vegas that are doing that for the smaller scale poker tournaments that are running right now. I don't think that. Well, I mean, as of now, we kind of don't even have the infrastructure to require that. The U.S. isn't doing an outstanding job of tracking who has been vaccinated. And, like I was saying earlier, I'm not certain that the government should be doing that. But as of now, people get cards when they get vaccinated, and maybe you can just show those and that's good enough proof. I don't know how hard it is to fake one or to get a blank one and fill it out yourself. It can't be that difficult, although I suppose it's probably a pretty legally risky sort of fraud to carry out. I don't know. It seems like it would be a reasonable thing to do, and in the current American political context, it's difficult for me to imagine it happening.
Oh, that's grim. Thanks for that.
You're just all right up.
Well, look, I'm going to switch over to a subject that I'm pretty confident Dara and I know almost nothing about, although he probably knows a little bit more than me. Bitcoin mining. Now, Bitcoin is obviously being talked about to a huge degree at the moment, but there seems to be maybe a bull run of sorts. And, obviously people may have watched SNL the other night to watch Elon Musk and the Dogecoin references and whatnot. So I suppose with that in mind, I again, trolling your Twitter a lot this week, I apologize. You said, I recently had the not very serious idea of creating clean Bitcoin, something like an NFT wrapper for Bitcoin that proves its time, place, and energy source of mining. I understand this is totally silly, but I think you could sell it. It was inspired by celebrity investor Kevin O'Leary, who said that he will buy only Bitcoin mined sustainably in countries that use clean energy like hydroelectricity and not blood coin mined in China. Now, as I said, Dara and I maybe not as well up as you. I certainly, this sort of added another area within it that I'm not very familiar with, although I do understand that these coins are mined, and I do understand that computers do it and they take up a lot of power to do that. So what is the ultimate energy cost of mining, say, a Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, the system is designed to make it it's designed for mining to be a competitive process, so that as the price goes up, you have to expend more energy to compete with other miners pushing it toward an equilibrium where mining is just profitable enough for people to pursue it. So I guess that presently the cost of mining a Bitcoin is somewhat less than the price of a Bitcoin. In terms of, dollars spent to buy the equipment and keep it running to do that. That's how the equilibrium is meant to work. I don't know off the top of my head what the calculated number as of today is. If Bitcoin's at 58K or whatever, I guess it's probably in the ballpark of 50 or 55, but I could be off a decent amount on that.
And if that's the case, is that just pure energy consumption to the value of 50K, or is it a bit more complicated than that?
I think it's primarily energy consumption, but there are also other costs that go into it. There are the fixed costs of buying the computer equipment, which is, I think, mainly graphics cards. GPU units are the most efficient processors to use for this kind of work. And then, you need to have a facility that stores that computer equipment, and you need to maintain it. And it's like running any other sort of business. I think the biggest input is electricity, but there are various other costs as well. And when you're talking about the sort of equilibration process that sets the price of doing that, it's all of those inputs go into that.
So if I'm to put my sort of crypto skeptic hat on for a moment, and to be fair, it is a hat I have worn at times over the years.
Me too.
It always just seemed to me, well, firstly, obviously, it claims to be a currency, yet obviously doesn't really behave like any currencies we know, in the sense that it fluctuates so wildly. And then secondarily, I suppose there was just a feeling of how maybe no one's really very good at explaining exactly what it does and how it works. And I suppose in that sense, sort of add to that the way in which it's marketed and the way in which people who own it remarket it, whether it's through their social media or whatever, has that sort of flavor of a pyramid scheme, even if it absolutely isn't one. And I'm not saying it is for a moment, but I suppose a combination of my ignorance, my unwillingness to go into the journey to find out more about it. But then, obviously you do see its uses. And Dara, I know, as a relatively newcomer to having crypto, I know you showed us your little dongle there a few weeks ago. It is useful for getting on some of the poker sites that you play on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the concerns you raise about Bitcoin, like what is its actual worth? I mean, that's all money, really. Like we just accept that the US dollar has value, and it has value because everybody accepts that it has value, and people will give you stuff when you give them US dollars. It's the whole concept of money is an interesting one, because essentially it's a massive shared fiction among us that these pieces of paper are actually have actual value. But because we all accept that, then they do have actual value. The Bitcoin mining thing is funny. Like, again, like I don't know as much as I clearly does about this. The first time I ever heard of Bitcoin mining, it was actually, it reminded me of a funny story. I have a hilarious female friend, one of the funniest people I've ever met. But around the time Bitcoin was coming out, she was sort of on the hunt for a husband. And she was very, very clear in what her requirements were. He had to be rich. That was pretty much the only requirement. So she used to keep me regaled with her tales from the hunt, and how she would decide whether somebody had the right level of richness or not. And she told me one night about this guy that she met, and she said he really seemed like he was rich, and people were treating him like he was rich. But I just wanted to make sure, so I asked him what he did, and he said he was a miner. So I said, right, okay. Miners don't make very much money. He's clearly not very rich. And I was like, really, like, what do you mean he's a miner? She said he mines something called Bitcoins or something. I don't know what it is, but yeah. So we've gone from that world where people had no idea what Bitcoins were to now where everybody's an expert. But I did explain the whole Bitcoin thing to my wife at one stage, and her take was when she heard about the energy consumption part, she was horrified. She was like, this is completely and utterly unnecessary. Why can't we just agree something else is money rather than this, where we actually have to expend energy? So I think the certainly a move to make it clean energy would be very welcome.
So maybe there's legs to your idea. Like, I know you were half joking.
The trouble with my idea is that it doesn't actually make any sense. And the thing that whatever his name was, Kevin O'Leary, I think.
That's right.
What he was saying doesn't make any sense, because the entire point of something like Bitcoin is that it's fungible, and there's no meaningful distinction between the Bitcoin that is in your wallet and some other Bitcoin that is in someone else's wallet. And furthermore, even if you want to imagine that if you make sure that you receive freshly mined Bitcoins that have just been generated and given to miners who are using hydroelectric power in Norway that you feel great about, and they send them directly to you as soon as they've been mined, it still doesn't make any sense, because they received those Bitcoins by basically winning a lottery where they entered, they bought tickets with their hydroelectric energy, and they happened to win that round of the lottery against the people who were buying tickets with the energy that they generated from coal mined in Xinjiang. So it's just completely insensible to imagine that there are some Bitcoins in circulation that are clean and good because they are derived from clean energy sources, and that there are other Bitcoins out there that are bad Bitcoins. The idea that I was proposing was making fun of somebody who imagines that might be a meaningful distinction, rather than proposing a real idea.
I'm really glad we really hammered that one home. Seeing it was all premised on a joke, guys. Look, potentially this show will go off the rails. You just never know. The next topic I have here is actually, I kind of think this is sort of cool. So I've been a little bit critical of Pokernews recently, because obviously I write for different people, so I have to attack all the competitors. No, I've been a little critical recently because it does feel at times like I'm in danger of sounding like I'm taking the piss here, but that there's no hard edge to their analysis of any situations going on in the poker world anymore. It's a little bit soft. It's a little bit friendly to all the sites. It's not very critical at times. And in fairness to them, they've created this new sort of show idea. It's a Thursday night show. It's basically a debate. And the motion for the next episode is, do ambassadors have moral responsibility when representing unregulated sites? Now, the three of us are ambassadors. We don't represent unregulated sites, but we do know people who do, and we do represent poker in general. Two Pokernews, this is sort of the format of it. Two Pokernews writers, I guess, take a side each. I think it's going to be Jason Glatzer versus Mo Nohara this week, and they will argue either side of that in, I suppose, a traditional enough debate format. Quick one there for anyone who is listening, in case you're unaware. What is an unregulated site? Well, simply put, it's a poker site where it doesn't come under government control in any way, usually because it's sort of shifted offshore and hasn't been shut down in any way, shape, or form. Regulated sites generally have, or do have, licenses. They have set rules they have to follow, usually regarding player deposits. The money handling is sort of the really important part. And again, there's probably some oversight regarding security measures taken by those sites to make sure games are clean and fair and all the rest of it. So with that in mind, Dara, do ambassadors have a moral responsibility when representing unregulated sites?
Yes, they do. I mean, and you don't want to overstate it, because at the end of the day, they are just ambassadors. They're not necessarily central to the thing. I'm not really sure there's that big a distinction between unregulated and regulated sites in this regard. If you happen to be representing a regulated site that does something incredibly shitty, I think you deserve to get the same sort of flack as somebody who's representing an unregulated site, which does something shitty as well. But at the end of the day, you are just an ambassador, so limited responsibility. I mean, if you go back through the history of poker, most of the really bad things that have happened have actually happened to sites that were regulated. So being regulated doesn't completely absolve you or vaccinate you against misappropriating player funds or allowing super users or any of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I think all ambassadors have responsibility. That's you. At the end of the day, you decide who you are going to represent, and no site or corporate entity is perfect. So you have to decide if you're willing to accept the bad points about who you represent. If you feel that the good points outweigh them enough. But certainly you should be concerned about it. It shouldn't just be a matter of, well, they've said they're going to give me money every month, so therefore I now represent them.
That's a great point, because I think that's something that we do see with some ambassadors, which is that they're not equipped to answer the questions that they should really be able to predict would be coming at them, depending on who they represent. Ike, turning to you, Chris Moneymaker was quoted in a recent Poker Industry Pro piece saying, unregulated sites done right are like cryptocurrencies, not controlled by others telling you what you can't do. See, I brought a full circle. See, the crypto thing was relevant now. You can see how this was all masterfully created. Is that a good take from Chris?
Yeah, I see where he's coming from for sure. I don't really think that regulators in general serve the interests of players very well. I don't think that they have done a very good job preventing players from being taken advantage of, and am not really aware of any major instances in which they have intervened to make things right when that does happen. So yeah, I kind of don't understand why the question is framed in the way that it is, that this situation might be much different if you are representing a site that has a gaming license versus representing one that doesn't. And I'm not even clear on what they're talking about when they talk about unregulated sites. What do they have in mind?
I think there are different levels of unregulated sites. For example,
yeah.
I mean, if you take a site like ACR, while they might not be licensed in certain places where they are, for example, in the States, they do specifically stay out of the states where the regulations are clear, where there is legal regulated poker, and they don't allow people to sign up from those states. Then on the other hand, you have sites that will literally take you from any, or not so much sites as apps that will literally take you from anywhere and use all sorts of mechanisms to translate to move the money around. So again, even within the unregulated, I don't think you can just classify them all as the same. I think there's a huge difference between somebody like ACR, who have a track record, and the principles involved seem like legitimate business people, and a lot of the shadier apps that have popped up, for example.
Yeah, the shadier apps are definitely in another category. I agree with you there.
And in that case, I mean, there aren't a whole lot of ambassadors for tiny shady apps. And I mean, if you're going to try to have some conversation about what sort of responsibility does someone in that role have, I think you have to be a little more precise about who and what you're talking about and what role they do have. If, say, you are sponsored by some app that runs private games that are overseen by some person or entity that runs a club on an app, and if you're sponsored by the app that offers the platform to run the club, are you responsible for the behavior of each of these individual clubs that uses the platform you're representing? Does anybody understand you to be vouching for the integrity of each of those game runners? I kind of don't understand what the question is. In the broadest sense, yes, I think people have an ethical responsibility to not advertise faulty products, to not tell people to play on a site that they don't have reason to believe is safe. But yeah, I just don't see the regulated versus unregulated division as important or even very clear where that dichotomy falls, what line they're separating across.
Well, I was kind of hoping it would go that way, and I sort of anticipated it might, because again, I get the words moral responsibility just sort of popped out at me, and I thought of you immediately, Ike, because there aren't too many people over the course of the poker world who have taken such principled stands to cost themselves money in their own pocket. Vicky Corrin stands out, you stand out, and there have been Alex Miller, there have been a couple of other people over the years who have really sort of borne the weight of responsibility for what maybe their paymasters were very much willing to do. And it isn't like exactly, and I suppose let's refer to it, you and Stars, it's not like Stars were going to expect you to take all the blame, like you were going to be the human shield for them. You could have kept a low profile, sort of waited that time out. But again, it was something
I could have gone out and said, I think they fucked this up and shouldn't have done that, and they wouldn't have fired me.
So with that in mind, then I suppose that the question then just comes down to, where is the line in terms of responsibility? Like Dara very rightly at the top pointed out that like it's limited liability what an ambassador should really be responsible for. Shitty companies can do things. We might get blindsided by Unibet. I'm sure we won't, but we might get blindsided by Unibet tomorrow and they announce something really terrible. And to some extent, we're going to be the faces of it. And we really have a moral quandary then of like, do we want to continue? Do we take a stand like you have done? Do we qualify it? Is there some middle ground? Can we convince our bosses to backtrack? Like, I suppose that's the thing that interests me, is that to some extent ambassadors are viewed as maybe the frontline customer service for these sites in a lot of situations. And I wondered, like, do you define your role now with Party in that sense still?
Well, so the way I conceptualized it as I was dealing with the Stars situation and have since, is that I don't control what the site does. I don't think I have retroactive responsibility when they behave badly in a way that I couldn't have anticipated or controlled. But that, once they did what they did with the Supernova Elite program, with, pulling the rug out from under people who had paid on the order of $100,000 in rake that year with an expectation of getting something very specific in return. The ethical responsibility I have as an ambassador for the site is that I shouldn't lie to people. And working as an ambassador for a site is literally endorsing the site, saying, I think it is a good idea to play poker on this site. If you're going to play online poker, I recommend that you do it here. That's your role as an ambassador. And if the situation unfolds in such a way where I don't think I can honestly say that anymore, then to continue working as an ambassador is to be a paid liar. And I'm not going to do that. So that's how I conceive of the moral responsibility of an ambassador, is that you should not put yourself in the situation of having to lie to people. Or, if you decide that you are going to do that, you should think clearly about that. And, in the grand scheme of things, that's not the worst thing you could do to make a living. There are people who are paid to do worse things than recommend that people deposit to poker sites that might steal from them. So if you need to make a living and that is what your skill set qualifies you to do, I'm not going to judge you more harshly than, say, my classmates when I was studying computer science who took jobs with Lockheed Martin. Like, I'd rather represent a shitty poker site than build missile guidance systems.
Yeah, that's you've definitely given us some context and some perspective on it. I appreciate that. No, great, genuinely great answer. I do appreciate it. Final topic. We're definitely going to wind round to you with this one, Dara. I want to say it from the outset. Dara did not ask me to bring up this topic, but it is going to find its way to him. You'll see now in a moment. Jason Koon says he can run 10.9 seconds, 100 meters, and offers a $2 million wager to the man who I think sort of just, 200 follower on Twitter guy who said, oh, 5 million says you can't. Now, I don't know to what level of seriousness that, obviously people with 200 followers might well be multimillionaires willing to do that. I'm not suggesting they wouldn't, but I don't know the level of seriousness or how seriously we're supposed to take that sort of flung out bet. But it all emanated, I suppose, from, I think it was a clip that Jason posted of a very big guy, I think he might be in the NFL, running a really fast sub 11 second 100 meter, and Jason, who I think is like 35 or 36, sort of suggesting that maybe he would still have it in him to do something like that if he trained for a year. And then this guy said, no chance, there's no way you can. Now it sort of ended up with Bill Perkins, as things often do when wild bets are being thrown around, sort of offering Jason a 100k free roll that if he can run sub 11 or sub maybe 10.9 at any point in the next 9 months or so, as 100k winging its way to a charity of their mutual choice, I think. Ben Wilanowski put this my favorite way, actually. He said, I would hate to bet against this thing, but I really would hate to bet against this person. Which I think really does sum up in a nutshell how much it does seem like an audacious thing to be able to do at Jason. We all know he's ripped and we all know he's an unbelievable athlete and he's committed, but it does seem like a stretch even for him. But at the same time, it's Jason Koon. So I'm not sure. Dara, which side of this one would you take?
The issue is, I presume I'm being referred to here from my running expertise, but I was a marathon runner. I really don't know how much of exactly an outlier a 10.9 100 meter runner is. I do know that people tend to really get this stuff wrong. I remember from my running days, there was one filmmaker who announced he was going to run a 4-minute mile training for a year, and every single runner knew straight away that is not going to happen. There is no chance that will happen. And on the last day of the year, he rebadged the documentary that he was making to show him just barely getting under 5 minutes as it was, which, a 5-minute mile is fast, and it's certainly an achievement, but it's a long way short of a 4-minute mile. So yeah, I don't really feel qualified when it comes to the sprinters. I mean, I do remember when I was training full time, that world was a bit of a mystery to me. Their training methods, everything about them was just different, very, very different from what we did. So I had no real sense of just how difficult it would be for a 35-year-old man to run 10.9. It does seem very, very aggressive and possibly close to impossible. But again, it is Jason Koon, and Jason knows far more about this stuff than I do. So again, I guess we're back to Ben's point. I would say I'm incredibly jealous that he got a 100k free roll. Throughout my entire poker career, I've tried all sorts of angles to get running bets off the ground. My very first year in Vegas, Devilfish, Dave Elliott, since departed, was trying to hustle some British businessmen that he could find a poker player playing the World Series main event who would be capable of running 2 marathons between midday and sunset Vegas time in Vegas. And obviously I was going to be the mark who was going to do that. But unfortunately, while it almost came off, I was getting a 10k free roll, not a 100k free roll. they Googled and found out that I was the reigning Irish 24-hour champion. So the bet didn't get off the mark. I've tried various times since. I tried to repeat Brian Rast's cycling from LA to Vegas with me having to run it. Zero interest. I've tried Barry Carter, even after this latest thing flared up, suggested that somebody could bet against me running 10 sub 4-hour marathons in 2 weeks. Again, zero interest.
Can I just say that when I saw that, I was like, no, I know that's easy. I know he can do that easy because I know how much you train. Now, I'm not trying to ruin your action here, Dara.
You're totally, I'm not only ruining my action.
No, but I want to know what would be a good bet. Okay, now you're obviously going to still say it's not quite,
yeah.
What do you think would be a sort of a reasonable challenge? Because I remember when we first met, you said that you envisioned yourself at some point, probably around this age now, sort of, I think it was maybe 8 or 10 years into the future, looking back from 10 years ago. And you said something like there was this great New York marathon that essentially runs the distance, I think, from the east to the west coast, but you just do it in laps of Central Park. And
the history of this race is it used to be a coast-to-coast race in the States back when ultra running was actually one of the biggest sports in the world, before the rise of cycling. Cycling essentially killed ultra running. So they used to have this race literally where people ran across America. It's pretty much impossible to do that now, the way the road system works in America anymore. So over time, the race shrunk down to just running around one block in New York. And you keep going until you've run enough laps of the block to have run the 5,000 kilometers. That was the original thing. So it's a fairly horrendous idea, but it is the world's longest race. And I always had my idea when I was an ultra runner that it would be nice to sort of bow out with a win in that race. What I thought would be, because the winner generally comes in around 43 days, which seemed feasible to me, given that I'd run 5% of the distance in one day. So, but you never really know this stuff. I mean, even when Barry said that, like my instinctive reaction was, yes, I could obviously run 10 sub 4-hour marathons in 2 weeks. But I mean, I don't know. I'm looking back at the runner that I was 12 years ago, and yes, he would have done it probably even with a broken leg. But now, 10 years later, 12 kilograms heavier, who knows? Like, it might not be possible anymore. But to answer your question, when the running from LA to Vegas thing was being discussed, I threw out a week as the time that I would have to do it. And I think it was Barry actually asked me, realistically, what do you think would be very, very tough? So I did actually research in terms of the distance and the terrain and temperature, et cetera, et cetera. And I reckon somewhere in around 5 days was actually the line.
Okay, so it would have been a nice little. I'd love to see you get one of these bets off the ground. I think we just need to get Perkins involved. That's like, maybe you can help us with this. Maybe we can figure out some way.
I've even tried direct tweeting Perkins with some of this stuff, and again, it's just tumbleweed.
I don't know what it takes to get his attention.
Well, what do you think? Do you think Jason, like, you know him better than us?
Yeah.
Do you think because he's a baby on the way as well? I know, because I talk to him once in a while, and it's like, hang on, I don't think you're factoring in sleepless nights here and all this other stuff. It does seem nigh impossible.
I don't know enough about running to have any direct sense of how difficult that task is. I know that he does. He was a sprinter on his college track team. He knows exactly what he's talking about doing, and I don't know. My intuition is to think that if he believes he can do it, he's probably right. That's been the most consistent pattern in my observing these feats of strength prop bets, is that if somebody claims they can do something that sounds really difficult, they're usually right. The example of the filmmaker notwithstanding, I think gamblers tend to be a lot better at assessing this sort of thing than other people do. And yeah, it seems like the people who bet that they can do something that sounds really hard mostly turn out to be right. It's usually not even that close.
Have you taken any outlandish prop bets over the years yourself, even if it wasn't a physical thing, maybe a mental thing? Or Anything like
Not
that?
really. My one physical prop bet story is from maybe 11, 12 years ago. I was in the Bahamas drinking in the Coral Lobby at Atlantis and ran into Daniel Negreanu, who I can't remember how the conversation got to this, but he wanted to bet me I couldn't do 50 push-ups. Which, you know, if you knew me in the couple years before that, seems like it would be a reasonable thing to expect that I would not be able to do 50 push-ups. But unbeknownst to him, I had started working with a personal trainer a few months previous and was, you know, not remarkably fit or anything, but in the best shape I'd ever been in. And I knew I could definitely do 50 push-ups. It would not even really be that difficult. And I managed to bet $2,000 that I could do 50 push-ups and dropped down and banged them out very easily and collected my $2,000, was feeling great about myself. And then he says, I bet you can't do it again. And for some reason, I was a little drunk and feeling really good about myself and thought, oh yeah, of course I can do it again. The first time was easy. And got maybe 15 or 20 in before giving up. I just had no chance.
Yeah.
That's my best physical prop bet story.
Sorry to interrupt, Mike. Was that within the last 8 years? Because I want to give Daniel credit now that he may have won a heads up in the last 8 years, if that's the case.
It was not. It was definitely pre-Black Friday. I'd say at least 10 years ago, probably closer to 12.
Yeah, actually, to wrap that up, the mistake I there obviously made was not understanding how important recovery is. So the first one's obviously going to be easier. The second one is more difficult. It's actually the same with the 10 marathon thing. Like, I know that the first 4-hour marathon would be very easy, but who's to say at the end of 2 weeks when I have to run my 10th 4-hour marathon, it's going to be a very different proposition. It's also true what he said, that if somebody thinks they can do something physically, so long as they're experts within that area, they generally tend to, because people in all physical areas are very, very aware of their own physical limitations. The apparent exception of the filmmaker who was way off actually wasn't really an exception, because he wasn't a runner before. So he had no idea of just how difficult it is for a normal person to run a 4-minute mile.
I mean, you would think you'd just be able to look back at history and see that a human did it for the first time less than 100 years ago, right?
Yeah, but again, it's one of those things where it depends completely on your perspective. Yeah, it is very recent, and like, all those people weren't terrible, but at the same time, there are literally thousands and thousands of 4-minute miles run every year now. There are high school students in most high schools in America who are, if they trained really, really hard, would probably be capable of a 4-minute mile. So it's no longer really that much of an outlier. But it's still exceptional. You're still talking about, even if 1,000 people or 5,000 people in the world are capable of it in a year, what percentage of that is the population?
Yeah. Well, but before Ike goes off with his calculator and actually works that one out for us, which I'm sure he will, I do want to say that we always...
Adjusted for COVID numbers as well. The population is getting smaller.
That's true, and we have to
and a whole lot have lung damage.
Jesus. Okay. On that dark note, I'm going to very quickly segue to what has become our recurring way to end these shows, which is Dara and his strategy nugget. I know there's people out there who they put up with the rest of the show, frankly. They don't enjoy any of the rest of the show. They just wait for this bit.
It's all for that 90 seconds at the end here where whatever pops into my head comes out. Yeah. Okay. So for this week's strategy nugget, this builds on one of the previous ones. I can't remember the order that I put these out in anymore, but I did say on a previous show that when you're looking for check raises, flop check raises, in spots where you have lots of value, double backdoor hands tend to make good check raises as bluffs, because there are a lot of turn cards where you pick up equity and you can go each barrel. Once that went out, I started having nightmares of suddenly everybody who watches the show is check raising every single double backdoor hand that's out there. So I would like to say that you can definitely overdo this. And to give a concrete example, let's say the cutoff opens off 40 big blinds and you defend the big blind and the flop comes Queen Jack 4, say with a flush draw. And you have a hand like King 7 of diamonds, which on the surface seems to fit the characteristics of a double backdoor hand. We can turn a straight draw, we can turn a flush draw. But if you check raise all of those hands, and there will be a lot of them, you'll be check raising as a bluff far too often. And also remember, this is a board where we won't actually have that many value check raises, because on Queen Jack 4, we don't have queens, we don't have jacks, and the opener does. So it's not a board we should be check raising very much anyway. So given that we won't have too many value check raises, we really don't want to go to town on these types of hands. So yeah, it's one of those, like, it's okay to do it, but don't overdo it.
That's really good advice. I'm reminded all the time when Dara kind of throws up these nuggets of sort of the way in which I guess he's framing them as being fairly GTO sort of approaches to the game, which is very much in vogue at the moment and will only become more so. But do you think there was a time when maybe just check raising all of those double backdoor hands, I'm trying to think maybe like 2010 or something, was actually what all the biggest winners were doing? They were twigging that actually you can overdo these ones because people will, you know, give you way too much credit, and actually these are the perfect hands because they will back into something sometimes.
I think even by 2010, if we're talking about the best players playing against the best players, people were using the tools they had available at the time, which would have been like Card Runners EV and Flopzilla and stuff like that, to, you know, actually go through combo by combo and figure out what a reasonably balanced check raising range looks like. And obviously it's nowhere near the degree of precision or accuracy that you get from using Pio Solver now. But yeah, I think exactly what Dara was describing already applied then, that you could figure out pretty well using the tools we had at the time that there were far more hands in that category that have, you know, roughly the right characteristics to be a reasonable check raise bluff. And that there are a lot of them, they're roughly interchangeable. And it probably makes sense to do it less than every time with most of those hands, or to have some system for picking the specific ones which you're going to use, since, you know, explicitly playing mixed strategies was not so common at that point.
Yeah, nobody was sitting there sort of looking at the dial on their watch, or at least very few, I'm sure, back then. Guys, it has been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. I knew this episode would run over because you'd be full of interesting takes. So thank you so much, Dara O'Kearney. Thank you, as usual. The pair of you were absolutely brilliant.
Thanks for having me.
The hottest new writer in poker.
Oh, there it is again. Okay, so that obviously now I'll do a new ending. Okay, guys, because I had to leave that in. Take care, everyone. Thanks.